My name is Candy Crosby Hastings. I am doing an informative speech today in fulfillment for the class Communications 542 for Liberty University. The title of this presentation is The Organic House Church Movement, History in the Making. I'd like to begin with a Bible verse from Acts 2:46 through 47. It says, "Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved." Thus began the house church movement. According to the New Testament, people did meet in homes for the early church. I want to go into some reasons why that may have been. According to Hebert, the early house church movement began because of persecution. The early Christians were under Roman persecution, and so they met in homes because it was a place of safety. It was a place where they would not be found out. Lockwood believes there may be some other reasons there, that other than just persecution, the home did provide a sense of safety. It provided a sense of comfort. It provided the convenience of home. Neil Cole, in his book, Organic Church and Church 3.0, believes that the early churches were truly a community. They were a community of believers who cared for one another. They took care of one another's needs. They worshiped together. The New Testament does corroborate that. According to the book of Acts, the early Christians actually would sell what they had to take care of each other. So it was truly a community there. This last point that I make says that this same humility is found in many of the underground house churches today. For instance, in countries such as China, house churches are prevalent because they are under persecution, and many of the house churches are the home churches of the Christians there. Now we're going to get into the organic house church movement in the 21st century. Now, when we think of the house church movement, we sometimes don't think that it is very prevalent in the United States and in Britain, in European countries. Today's organic house church, however, does not just meet in homes. Now remember that the biblical house church was very much convenient for the people. It was safety for the people. Well, today's house church can meet anywhere because it caters to a busy lifestyle of the people that it's reaching out to. I know for our house church, we meet in our home. There are times we'll meet at the park. We've met at the lake. We've met at coffee houses. We've met on nature trails. Anywhere people are is where house churches take place, because it does meet, as Effa points out, the needs of an increasingly busy society. Now I want to go into a little bit how the biblical house church and today's house church is different from what we consider church when we think of church today, the traditional church. Now today's traditional church is very much institutionalized. What that means is it's based on a lot of programs. It's based on denominations. You know, there's a different denomination of church on every corner. You have a Methodist church on one corner, you have a Baptist church on another corner, you have a Catholic church across the street, and they're all based upon their own theology. Where the biblical house church, as well as the 21st century house church, is not. It does not have a denomination behind it. It's very, very free. It's very much a living type of church. In the traditional church, the emphasis is on Sunday worship. How many have ever heard the phrase, "we're going to church"? Usually we go to church on Sundays, and that's our worship. Where I have here that the biblical house church, and also our house church today, is everyday worship and worship every day. Because it's a lifestyle. It's not about going to church. The people are the church, which gets us exactly into the next emphasis. The emphasis on the traditional church is often on the building. We're going to church. We often refer to the building as the church, when in reality, where is not important, because the people are the church. If you go back to the original word for church in the New Testament, it's ecclesia. And what that means is an assembly of people. It didn't mean a building. In the traditional church, the emphasis is often on the leaders. You know, the pastor does the sermon, and he's the one that you go to for spiritual guidance. The Sunday school teachers plan lessons. The worship leaders plan the music. Where in the organic church, the house church, and the biblical house church, and today's, the emphasis is on everyone. Everyone has a part in the house church. Everyone is a minister. That's one of the basic premises of the house church movement. I want to get into a few more emphases of the organic house church movement in general. The first paragraph I have titled Where Two or Three Are Gathered. And that is, of course, based upon the words of Jesus, that where two or three are gathered, God is present. Jesus is present in the gathering of just 2 or 3 people. It's very interesting when you get into the works of authors such as Neil Cole in Church 3.0. He believes that the unit, the house church unit, should only be comprised of 2 or 3 people. So, for instance, if we had a gathering of 5 or 6 people, what he calls that unit is pregnant, and it's about to give birth to another unit. It should never go more than 2 or 3 people because each individual is important. That includes in paragraph 2, the children. You know, when we think of the institutional church, children are often segregated. They are given their own activities. That way they don't interfere with adult worship. Where in the house church, children are a part of it. And that's not just because the children can learn from adults. It's because the adults can learn from the children as well. You know, children were very important to Jesus. He said that we should not forbid children from coming to him. And so children are included in the discussions and the activities. They are included in everything. That also includes unbelievers. And that's really interesting to think about. You know, one of the things that Jesus was known for was reaching out to people that the religious leaders didn't want to reach out to. He reached out to the sinners, to the tax collectors, to the prostitutes, the people that no one else wanted to have anything to do with. One of the perfect examples in the house church movement is communion. When we think of communion, we often think of going to a church. We're given, you know, the elements, and it usually is either an open communion or a closed communion. What that means in an open communion, all Christians can take part. In a closed communion, someone in that denomination can take part. However, in Jesus' Last Supper, did you ever think that he gave communion to Judas? Now, Judas was the one who would betray Jesus, but he took part in communion. He took part in the Last Supper. So one of the basic premises of communion is a fellowship meal. Jesus took the elements from the Passover supper that he had eaten with his disciples, and he used those as a symbol of him, of his death. The bread is his body, the wine is his blood. So likewise, when Paul wrote about communion in the New Testament, he wrote that it's a fellowship dinner. You know, there's a funny story in one of Neil Cole's books, Church 3.0, where someone used pancakes and syrup to represent communion. Because it was a meal he was sharing with someone, and he was using that as a symbol. And it's very important that that is extended to everyone in the house church movement, whether they are a Christian or a non-Christian, because it's fellowship. And it's representative of what Jesus has done. I want to end with a quote from Neil Cole's Church 3.0. It says, "Connects God's infinite complexity and power to simple and ordinary people who are capable of doing something easy and normal. Let God be the complex part that gets all the glory, and let us be the simple part that doesn't deserve any credit because we're doing nothing beyond the norm. We are the clay pots that carry the glory of divine truth in us." So that again is showing the basic premise of the organic house church movement. We're ordinary people. There's no special training. There doesn't have to be, because God is the one that's working. We're not. It isn't based on the building. It isn't based on a seminary degree or theological studies. It is based on God working through ordinary people.